Yo, 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 I'm Josh Paulison, and I want to talk about readability in code. That's right. We're going to talk about what makes code readable, what readability is, what readability isn't, and that's it. So let's get started. So what actually makes code readable? So I want to talk about what readability is first off. And I've got code over here that's hopefully kind of readable and that hopefully won't make people cry. Actually, maybe I should show code that's less likely to make people cry. This code's fine. Why is it static down here? Anyway, what actually makes code readable? What is readability? What is readability? So readability is about being able to understand a code project in pieces and as a whole. If I can go down and I can look at a function in here, and I'm hoping that I find a good example in here. Let's say that we've got request restart. This is actually, now I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is kind of gross. Let's look at open user panel. So I can look at this and I can go, okay, so it's looking at, it's getting a port number. It's getting a user panel path. This is a lot of logic. It's not a lot of logic. It's just, now I'm like, oh, this is also a little bit rough. The goal is to be able to understand a code project in part or as a whole. You do see that you've got these variables here, port number, user panel path, and then we've got runtime open web page. That's pretty clear what's going on here. It is grabbing a path and it is opening a web page. And if I look at the port number, I can see this variable and then see, oh, okay, I'm getting a setting called server port. And then here, I just don't dislike that it goes over the edge of the screen. User panel path equals the server manager, user panel path structure replace. This might be the type of thing. Yeah, this is a JavaScript. I hate the way that JavaScript works with statics. Anyway, the goal is to be able to look at a part of the code project, see how it fits into the whole. So if I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, so it's opening a web page with the user panel path. And then I can go and I can see, oh, okay, where are we using this? Okay, so on starting the server, if we want to open the user panel on startup, then we do that. Okay, I think that's pretty understandable. You can understand pretty well what's going on. I like that I start this video and immediately start trashing my own code. We're talking about readability. That's good. So if I look at a function, I want to be able to understand that function. When I look at a file, I want to be able to understand quickly how that function fits into the overall picture. And I know it might be referenced in other files, it might be utility function, etc. But I want to be able to understand when I look at it throughout the project, like, why would I use it? Where is it being used? I want to be able to look through the project and quickly understand. Readability is about understanding. That's the point. It's not about well, I'm going to get into what it's not about later. Another thing is that it's a scale. Understanding pieces and how they fit together. Just say that. And also readability is a scale. There can be this thought of like, well, what is readable? Well, okay, it's a scale. It's not a yes or no. It's not an on or off. You have different levels of readability. There's more and less readable. And there's also like the ability to have a function be readable, but not readable as a whole. There's an ability to have the code as a whole be readable, like to be able to look at an initialization method, for example, and see all the things it's doing, and be like, oh, I get what it's doing. And then you go into the initialization method and you're like, this makes no sense at all. So there's different levels of readability and there's different types of readability. There's readability of seeing how things are in relation to each other. Sometimes fixing readability is just reorganizing the functions in a file. And then you're like, oh, this follows the flow of what I care about. Now I can read this more easily. I can see how these fit together. It's not always a complicated thing to improve readability. Sometimes it's really straightforward. Sometimes it's a simple rename. Sometimes it's simply, sometimes it can be more of a refactor where it's like, hey, if we isolate this part of the logic, then I understand that this is all the stuff relevant to this specific problem that I'm trying to solve. So there are different ways to improve the readability, but the goal is to be able to understand a code project in pieces and as a whole. And I think I'm way more excited to talk about what readability is not. So what is not readability? That's a great way of phrasing that. What readability is not is more, this is fine. So first thing that readability is not, it's not guidelines that somebody else set out for you. I feel like some people will get upset about this. That's fine. You're allowed to be upset. Leave me a negative comment. Don't be rude. I mean, it's not necessarily rude. It could be. Anyway, you can decide whether or not to be rude. Hi there. So what is not readability? It's not guidelines. So if you think that you follow the guidelines and you have readable code, no. Just capitalizing your functions in certain ways and organizing your code in a specific way doesn't necessarily make it readable. In fact, you can break all the guidelines in a very readable code. As far as like you might be using a Pascal case instead of camel case, like in JavaScript, generally it's camel case. But you could use Pascal case instead and have readable code. You could be using reverse camel case, which is my absolute favorite. Reverse camel case, by the way, is this is something that I proposed at previous job. So it's what was it? It was like reverse camel case. Why am I talking about? Oh yeah, it was the last letter would be capitalized. I think this is what it was. Yeah, this is amazing. Everybody needs this in their life. You could be using reverse camel case. Don't use reverse camel case. That actually is bad for readability. Anyway, that's not important. Readability isn't just about guidelines. Following the guidelines, you can still have very unreadable code. It's not just about that. It's also not about conformity, regardless of context. Readability is context dependent. So as an example, different programming languages generally have different structures. It could also be that you have a part of the project that is more functional in an OOP-centric project, or that's a little bit more OOP in a functional-centric project, whatever. You could have all sorts of different things that are structured differently, and readability is dependent on the context. Readability in a part of a project that's focused on a game loop might be very different from readability in a part of the project that is all about serializing and deserializing data. There are just different things that you're going to be focusing on. There are different things that you're going to be thinking about. As a dev, if you go into a file that's about the game loop, you're probably going to have different expectations as to what's there than if you're going to a serialization file. And so where things are at, the relative positions of things, how much things are broken out into separate files could be very different. And so it is very context dependent. It's not conformity regardless of context. And actually I'll specify that, regardless of context. Readability is context dependent. Something else is it's not clean code necessarily. It's not clean code or another set of guidelines or other guidelines. And I'm not actually trying to pick on clean code specifically here in the sense of capital clean. I'm talking about like following guidelines. It's really kind of the same thing as above, I guess. But I was thinking in this case like structure guidelines or syntax guidelines more so. Like there's different syntax guidelines, and then there's also ideas about how you should structure your code in general. It's not necessarily following those things. You can, what I found is that if you try to follow specific rules and you're unaware of your context, you're unaware of your goals, it doesn't necessarily help you at all. Your goal, again, I like this Mike Acton quote. Your job is to solve problems. Your job is not to write code. Your job is to solve problems, not to write code. That means that just writing code in a specific, like readability is about understanding a code project in pieces or as a whole, and understanding code is about understanding what problems it's solving, what data transformations it's making, what the heck is it actually doing. Ooh, I've got one of my favorites coming up as to what readability is not. And again, I want to emphasize there is not a black and white, it's good or it's bad. It's a scale. And so if you're like, well, this is very much in line with clean code, so that means it's readable. No, that doesn't mean that it's readable. That means that it's very much in line with clean code. If whatever structure you're using, the goal is readability, not conformity to any set of guidelines. And that's context dependent. That can also be team dependent. Different teams have different ideas. Hello again. And so you really need to make sure that you keep that in mind, and that you are, I think I'm harping on this, but I like harps, they're beautiful instruments. Anyway, another thing is that readability is not based on OOP or functional programming or any other paradigm. This is also probably something else that is going to likely upset some people. You can write readable or unreadable code in any language. I think that's important to note. In any paradigm, it is possible to write bad code in any paradigm. You could have the best ideas in the world. You could have some of the not clean code, but the cleanest code, lowercase letters, and have it be a completely jarbled mess because of your context, because of what you're trying to do. You can write unreadable code in any language, any paradigm, but it can take studying, learning from seniors. It could take creativity depending on the context to make something that's readable, because different problems, you're trying to solve different problems, right? And so readability is dependent on understanding how that code is solving the problem. It's understanding that part of the code. It's understanding how it fits into solving other problems. And so understanding how you're solving a problem depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. So readability is always possible, but there are varying levels of readability, and it is context dependent. You know, the concept of readable assembly is very different from the concept of readable JavaScript. It is. And so if I'm like, well, we have to do it this way because it's readable over in JavaScript, or it's readable in C, or it's readable in assembly, or it's readable in Java, whatever. It's like, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? The main thing is that people can understand what problems your code is solving and how it fits together to solve bigger problems. And this is my favorite one. I can't wait to bash on this. Readability is not abstraction. Okay? Abstraction does not equal readability, despite what some people seem to think. I'm going to read this because I like how I wrote it. Readability is about being able to understand code, and abstraction is all about trying to remove the need to understand code. I'd actually argue that the two can be directly opposed to each other. Not necessarily, but they can be. The idea that abstraction increases readability implies that your job isn't to write the core code. Usually, I have to get into the code and fix it. I'm a programmer. That's my job. So, abstraction, trying to remove the need to understand code, basing the logic around not needing to understand what's going on under the hood, is directly against my goals of trying to understand what's going on. Because I'm trying to solve problems. I'm not trying to work in a project I don't understand. If I want to solve a problem, I have to understand the problem, but I also have to understand how we're solving the problem. My goal is to solve problems. My goal is not to avoid understanding the problem. And so if somebody is demanding abstraction, or if that's treated as a god, no, abstraction is not readability. I'm not saying, hey, don't, I like having an API that has a wrapper so that you don't have to understand the API. We don't need to all know the REST API behind a web service. We can have something that helps us with that. I'm not saying that we never do any of this, but abstraction doesn't equal readability. There is a level that can be useful. I mean, heck, if you're working in JavaScript, you have a lot of abstraction. Anything that you're working in, it's an abstraction of binary. So it is abstraction. I'm not saying never abstraction, but abstraction is not necessarily readability. So if you're struggling with a part of your code project, I think that sometimes the best thing can be to reduce the number of abstractions you have to improve your readability. Because I've seen projects where you have so much abstraction, you're trying to block so much out so that people don't have to worry about it, that what happens is that people get worried about it because they're trying to solve a problem they can't figure out how. It is a tricky, it can be a tricky thing in that you don't necessarily know what people need to know. Like, I understand that also there might be a level of like relativity. I like to know the core of a program and how it works. I try to have it so that anything that I write is readable. I don't go, well, the API is readable, therefore who cares about the internals? No, I want people to be able to read the internals. If I don't make my internals readable, then I haven't made my code readable. If you think that making a readable API is the goal of programming, and that the internals don't need to be readable as well, then I don't want you on my team. That was kind of harsh, but oh well. So again, what is readability? Readability is ultimately about understanding pieces and how they fit together. And let's add this. Understanding how pieces, let's say how pieces solve problems and how they fit together to solve problems. Like, that's the goal, right? What is the problem that this code is solving, and how does it fit together with other code to solve bigger problems or different problems? And readability is a scale. Here's what readability is not. It's not syntax guidelines. I'm not saying go against syntax guidelines. They're very useful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your code is readable just because you're following that. Conformity regardless of context. Context matters a lot for readability. It matters in like what order you're looking at your logic, what you're trying to find, how hard is it to find what's important related to this, how hard is it to find what this logic is calling, like how many levels deep do you have to go to figure out what this one line of code is actually doing. Readability is not clean code or other guidelines. even if you follow guidelines that might help in some cases, you can make horrible code. And I haven't dug enough into clean code to be like, I like or dislike. Well, I think I've dug enough to figure out whether I like or dislike it, but I would need to spend more time in it to give a real good opinion on that. Paradigm dependent. It is, wait, what is not readability? Did I write that correctly? Paradigm independent, I think it doesn't come from paradigm is really what I mean more so. It doesn't come from paradigm. OOP, functional, etc. It doesn't necessarily mean that your code is readable because it's OOP or because it's functional. And abstraction is not readability. Abstraction isn't always, like, I'm not saying never abstraction. If I'm writing in a programming language and not binary, there's a level of abstraction there. We're working in abstraction. But abstraction doesn't equal readability. Just because you've abstracted more doesn't mean that you've improved readability. If the underlying code isn't readable, then your code isn't readable. It's kind of like saying you have healthy skin, but your guts are messed up. Okay, are you healthy? No. Doesn't matter that your skin is healthy. You're screwed up inside. So it's same with your code. If your code isn't readable internally, it's not readable. It's a mess. And so then you need to work on improving that so that other people, when they have to fix it, when they have to update it, not if, when, they can. And I realize that what I'm talking about is very context dependent. I've worked more in game dev, and in that case, you generally have to dig into the bowels of your code base to solve problems. That's been what I've experienced. So I hope this is helpful. So really, when you're looking at readability, and I could look at some different ways to make your code more readable, I kind of just want to talk here about what actually, like, the overall concepts of it, and I'm happy to show some of my opinions on what makes readable code or unreadable. I mean, you saw me even complaining about my own code at the beginning, so there's different things where I'm like, this could be better. But when we look at what is readability, it's ultimately understanding pieces, how pieces solve problems, and how they fit together to solve problems. Because your job is to solve problems. And you want to make sure that you can solve problems and that other people on your team can solve their problems. And so that is the whole point of readability. It's to help you see how pieces solve problems and how they fit together to solve problems. If you're interested in tutoring for web dev or Unity and I didn't scare you away with some of my comments, I've got a Wisant page that you can go to down below and contact me for tutoring. I also do web programming and game programming, and I have a Fiverr for that, in which case you can do cool things like interact with your stream, and that's a lot of fun. And I have all these different modules that are hooked in here, and I'd be happy to make something for you. Maybe you're a programming streamer and you do not want to touch web code, but you want browser sources that are cool. Hey, I'd be happy to talk. And I have other cool things that I'll link to below. Yeah, I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. I'd love to hear your thoughts on readability in, like, I guess more the conceptual sense. And I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. You take care now, and you.